Hey guys, Brian Schultz here with Cape Falcon Kayak, and welcome to the third video in our series where I talk about the construction details and also the outfitting options for all of our skin-on frame kayaks. Now, in the first video in this series, I gave a brief introduction about myself and my history as a skin boat builder, and then we talked all about the different kinds of wood that we choose for the framework and a lot of the construction details for the frames for these kayaks. And then in the next video, we went on to talk about different options for the fabric covering and different options to coat that with, and also a bunch of the standard outfitting that is common to all of my different kayaks. Now, in this third video in the series, we're going to be going into a lot of detail about different outfitting options for these boats that you can choose just depending on your particular needs as a paddler. And I'm really excited about this video because there's so many things I want to show you that are brand new. We're going to be talking about deck line patterns, perimeter line choices, cockpit and seating options, the brand new foot brace system we're using, pump storage, keel protection, action camera mounts, and even the new catamaran and sailing system that we're going to be releasing sometime in 2022. So lots of cool details to get into here, but before we get started, I just want to mention that just like my last video, I'm going to make this a dual purpose video for my YouTube channel and my boat building course. That way I don't have to duplicate this content. So if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, this is just a good opportunity to get familiar with us and our skin boat building philosophy. And if you're watching this on my building course, this is a great way to familiarize yourself with all the different custom options on these boats so you can start planning your build early, and then if you want to and you're already purchasing stuff from us, you could have us throw a lot of this stuff into your kit and then it's going to get shipped to you without having to pay a separate shipping fee or do a bunch of shopping right at the end of your building process when you're eager to get out on the water. So what I've done for today's demonstration is brought two brand new kayaks into the studio that are rigged with about as much stuff as I would ever put on a skin-on frame kayak. The first one is this new size LPB, which is the 125-pound size. This kayak is rigged for catamaran, sailing, general purpose touring modifications, and a few things that I just personally like to put on my own boats. I've also got the new flat-decked version of my F1 kayak, which is rigged very similarly, but with some different modifications that relate specifically to the flat deck. Now, I don't want you to get intimidated by all of these deck rigging details. This isn't necessarily how you have to set up your own kayak. It's just showing you all the different options so you can start thinking about how you want to set up your own kayak. Actually, I think I'm going to start out on this new flat deck version of my F1 kayak here, and if this feels a little bit like deja vu, I did already go through a brief overview of the deck rigging on this boat in the flat deck F1 video, but in this video I'm going to go into a lot more detail. That way you can see up close how all of these things works, and that can help you make planning and purchasing decisions. So first up at the bow here, we've got the bow loop, which you can use to carry, tow, or rescue by. And if you're going to be putting a sail on one of the flat deck version, you're going to need some type of a pulley for this line here. Now, what I've chosen for this boat is this really cool little race light pulley here that has this captured pin at the bottom, because that way, if I'm not in sailing mode, I can take all the sailing stuff off the boat. But then when I want to go out sailing, I can just slide this over like this, lock it down, and I can run the uphaul line through this. Now, if you don't want to buy this fancy little pulley, it's totally fine just to get a tiny little micro pulley and tie it on here permanently, but you will have that kind of jangling around when you're not using your sail. Now, coming a little bit further back on the deck here, you can see the mast base for the sailing system that we're working on right now. And this is a pretty common little fitting here. You can look at my website for more details on this. Right now, we're not currently selling these, but I'm hoping ultimately to have all the pieces for our sailing system in one place so you can order all this stuff at the same time if you're buying a kit from me. And so this is sitting on top of a block, which is sitting on top of a large reinforced deck beam right here to be able to handle the load from the sailing system. And then coming back a little bit further, you can see I've got a couple of metal pad eyes right here. And if you're going to be using my sailing system, it's really important that these are made out of metal, because the nylon pad eyes that I use for everything else aren't strong enough and they'll actually start to deform. Now, if you're noticing that this pad eye is screwed down to a plastic plate, what this plastic plate is one of two possible catamaran board locations on the flat decked version. And then back here you can see there's a plastic pad eye screwed down, and I've got a perimeter line routed through that. that. Now, if there wasn't this catamaran plate here, this perimeter line would come all the way forward and through this right here, and this would be only a plastic pad eye if this wasn't part of the sailing system. So really quick, just to talk about perimeter lines. If you're not familiar with what these are, a perimeter line is basically just a rope that goes on the outside of your boat, and it gives you something to grab onto in a rescue situation. And this is especially important for lightweight kayaks in windy situations, because in those conditions, if you lose your grip on your kayak, you usually only get one good slap on the boat before the wind takes it away from you. And in that case, the perimeter line can mean the difference between being able to do a successful self-rescue or losing your kayak and ending up in a dangerous situation. Now, just a really quick discussion on perimeter line choices. There's actually two different cords that I commonly use on my own boats. The first one is this 5mm polyester. This stuff is nice because it's inexpensive, it's UV resistant, it's abrasion resistant, and it doesn't tend to absorb moisture. The only real downside of this particular cord is that it's kind of stiff, so it's a little bit hard to tie knots in. The other cord that I commonly use is this 5mm nylon with the reflective striping woven into it. And nylon is nice because it's a little bit softer, so it's easier to tie knots in. It's also a little bit more abrasion resistant, although it's not as UV resistant, so it's not going to last quite as long as the polyester. Basically, the main reason that I like the nylon is for this reflective striping here, which is just really great for visibility at night. So I know this doesn't look like much, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the light really quick and hold up a flashlight. And now you can really see just how much visibility is coming off these little stripes here. So this is going to be really great if you're in an area where you're going to have other boaters around in the dark. It's also just really good for keeping track of your own paddling partners when you're out paddling at night here. And which cord you ultimately choose just depends on what you need for your situation. So anyways, that's what perimeter lines are all about here. Now let's come back and you can see that I've got another pad eye that's oriented in the opposite direction here that's doing dual duty as a perimeter line routing point, but also as an attachment point for this bungee loop right here. This is useful for a couple different things. The first one is anytime you need to tuck something out of the way for just half a second to get your hands free, but you don't need that thing to be held down necessarily really securely on deck. And one of the times that I find myself using this the most is during kayak rescues, because right in the middle of a kayak rescue, there's about 15 seconds where you need to grab both people's paddles and put them out of the way, but you need to be able to access them again really quickly. And so in that case, this bungee loop is the perfect place to put those paddles. It's also good for, just anything you need to set down for a second, a fishing pole, maybe you find a cool stick of wood floating in the water that you want to bring home with you. So general utility purposes, but also I use this as a traveler, a vang, and shock absorption for my sail system, which is going to minimize the chance of an accidental capsize. So this guy has a lot of different uses. I find it to be so handy that I just automatically put it on all my personal boats these days. Now, coming a little bit further on deck, you can see the plastic toggle and leather deckline pattern that I talked about in the previous video. And just to give you a refresher, these are heavy English bridle leather straps. They're super strong, they're resistant to UV and salt water, and I tie these all the way through to the inside of the frame. That way you can carry, tow, or rescue by any leather line on any of my kayaks. And the way that I commonly use this line is I will put my spare paddle on deck in front of me right here and then lock it down with the toggle like that. And this spare paddle is not going anywhere, even if I get tumbled in the surf. But if the worst happens and I end up upside down without my paddle in my hands, it is super easy just to grab this like that, and then it's already in the right position to roll up with. So really great solution for storing your spare paddle. And the other thing that I commonly do with this line is tuck my Greenland paddle underneath it at an angle just like this. And this solves two problems at once. First, it gives me somewhere to put my paddle while my hands are free that's not going to drift away from me, but also this projects down to the water at an angle which is going to stabilize the kayak in both directions. Something I want to mention about these lines though is that unlike bungee cord, these will stretch a little bit permanently, and so I don't suggest that you store your pump underneath here because your bilge pump is going to stretch out these lines and then they're not going to be as good for the other two things that I just mentioned. And there's a couple of much better storage solutions for your bilge pump that we'll talk about here in just a minute. Now, coming around to the other side of the front deck, you can start to see how our sailing system is taking shape here. On this side of the front deck, I've got the uphaul cleat, which pulls the sail upright. And over here, I've got a really neat little combination sheet cleat and tie down system. And this is a micro clam cleat that I've modified. So if I'm sailing and the boat starts to get overpowered, I can just swipe my hand across there, it lets go of the sheet, and I don't get pushed into the water. And then on the bottom of this, you've got a bungee cord that comes down and around this little lashing hook and makes a super solid tie down for the sail. And it's really important that you're not lazy about how you tie down your sail, because if you end up in a rescue situation or a surf situation and the sail comes off of the front deck, you can end up in a lot of trouble. Now, when I'm not in sailing mode, this cleat is actually just kind of handy, and I would think about even putting this on my boat even if I wasn't adding a sail, because it just makes a great little place to put all kinds of things. Sometimes I find myself putting my telephone underneath here with a lanyard attached, of course. Personally, in a modern kayak, I like to put the bilge pump underneath the front deck, but if you like to keep your pump on deck, this is a good solution for that as well. Sometimes if I'm out early in the morning, I might bring my coffee thermos and stick it under here. And then a final use for this loop that doesn't apply to me personally, but might matter to some people, is if you want to carry a split paddle on the front deck as a spare. Now, personally, I'm not into a split spare paddle, because if I'm upside down getting pounded in the surf and my paddle's gotten torn out of my hands, I find it kind of challenging to take one half of a paddle and roll up with that. And so for me, it's always going to be a full-size spare on the front deck. But if you're going to do a split paddle like this, I find that it's much easier to grab one half of it this way rather than trying to work it out from underneath these leather deck lines. And just a quick technical note about that, if you are carrying a split spare paddle on the front deck, it's really important that the tips of this go underneath a real deck line and not just a bungee cord here. That way this is going to be held down nice and securely if you end up in a rough water situation. So moving on to the cockpit area here, this is something that we talked about in a previous video, but I'm just going to throw on a spray skirt and hop down in here just to kind of review how all of this is set up, because most of it's the same, but a few things are different. Now, what is the same here is that we maintain this keyhole shaped wooden cockpit combing, and the geometry of this is really critical, because for me personally, as someone who's spent a lot of time in the surf zone, not being well locked into a kayak is not an option for me. And so I make this narrow enough that I can get really good knee purchase on either side, and then I back that up with some minimalist foam thigh braces right here. At the same time, as someone who's also done a lot of distance paddling, I know that it's important to be able to raise your knees when you need to get a little bit of a stretch so you can be more comfortable. And so it's kind of a balance here between the shape that's going to give you good knee purchase, but also a shape that's going to allow you to comfortably lift your legs when you want to. Now, another thing that's brand new on this combing is we are only currently shipping these out with a double lip design. And this gives you an extra 1/4 of an inch over the previous amount of purchase we had right here, which is just a super solid spray skirt attachment. So for example, I'll just go ahead and put this on like this. And then if you imagine you're getting pounded in the surf, you can get imploded all the way down to the bottom of the kayak here. And this spray skirt is not going to come off. Now, granted, that's probably not necessary for most people's paddling situations, but where this double lip can really come in handy is if you're someone that likes to paddle with a sea sock as well as a spray skirt. And sea socks are kind of a complicated subject. I personally don't like them very much, but I do see certain scenarios where they make sense. But if you're going to be able to use one at all, it's really important to have a well-fitted sea sock and also a big enough spray skirt lip. Otherwise, the sea sock can actually become its own safety hazard. So standard in all of our kits this year is the double-lipped cockpit combing. So you've got solid spray skirt attachment and sea sock compatibility. Now, taking a look at some other stuff that's new in the cockpit, we recently changed the Snapdragon style backband that we were previously using with a new backband that I had custom designed specifically for these boats. It's not a huge change. It's mostly the same system I was using before. It's just the shaping is a little bit different and the padding is a little bit different. Just optimizes the comfort of this area just a little bit more than the previous version. Now, another thing that's changed in here is how I'm managing the seating situation. Up until now, what I've done is put 2 layers of foam in this area. I had 1 layer underneath the ribs, and then I had a full-length seating mat on top of the ribs right here, and both of those things together ended up being surprisingly comfortable. They would allow your center of gravity to sink as low as possible, so the kayak was nice and stable, but not so low that you would start to feel the ribs in the keel. So that was very comfortable, but then last year I started experimenting with these suspended seats right here. And if you want to know how to make this, there's a separate video that you can watch that'll walk you through this process. And basically all this is just a strip of the normal nylon fabric that we use to cover the boat that is wrapped over a couple dowels fitting behind the ribs, and then it is sewn together on the sides. And if you build this properly so it sits low enough, then you're going to be super stable in your boat, and it's not going to raise your center of gravity like most kayak seats will. But because it is fabric, it's going to conform to the exact shape of your behind, and it's also not going to allow you to sink any lower down into the kayak, as can sometimes happen with foam that can compress over time. Now, another advantage to going with the suspended seat here is it adds more airflow beneath the seating area, which helps you to be a little bit cooler, and also it helps crud to not build up in this area like it would when we had foam underneath these ribs. So the instructions for this seating arrangement are standard in my course. I also have a separate video on YouTube that shows you exactly how to make this. Keep in mind though, if you're going to build this, it has to sag down all the way until either side touches the skin, because especially in a Greenland kayak, if you start tightening this up, it'll raise your center of gravity and it'll make you a little bit tippy. Now, dropping down inside the cockpit for a second, something else that's new this year is these Select style foot braces. And how these work is you just take this wand and turn it 90 degrees, and then you can either slide the foot pad back and forth with your hand if you're on shore, or if you're out on the water, you can use your toe to move this, and then you can just reach down and lock this back down. And these aren't quite as easy to adjust as the foot braces that we were using previously, but they are so much stronger and so much more positive, and they come with the ability to add a drop kit for people with smaller feet, or the ability to add rudder control, which can be really useful if you're setting up a sailing system. Now, keep in mind, these are not exactly the same as the Select foot braces that you can get in other places, and so if you get these from somewhere else, take a look on our website, because we sell a special adapter kit and hardware pack that'll let you put these in our boats. Now, something else that's new for this year is this super cool little under the front deck pouch that you can make out of scraps from your kayak fabric and a little bit of Velcro. And this makes a fantastic little place to store your bilge pump, or anything else that you want to have quick access to on the water, as long as you don't mind opening your spray skirt for a minute. So this is held in here with Velcro on either side of the deck ridge and also at the front. And then on the back here, it just fits like that. It's totally out of the way, doesn't interfere with your foot position at all. And then anytime you need access to this stuff, you can just pull that down, pull out your bilge pump. Now, you can put anything you want in here. This would be a great place for a hydration pack, or a little bit of extra food, or maybe a bottle of wine, or a teddy bear, or a handgun, or anything else you think you might want in your kayak on the water. So I've got plans for this in the standard building course. So if you're taking my building course, there's going to be a little section that shows you how to build this. Now, coming up onto the back deck here, right behind the cockpit, what you're looking at is one of two possible rigging patterns for this area. The first one is the leather strap and toggle system that we've been using for a lot of years now. And this is something new that I'm doing, which is an adaptation of the skin-on-frame canoe Catamaran system that I've been using for years in the skin-on-frame canoes. And basically how this works is we've got a couple plastic plates with pad eyes screwed down on top of them, and then some heavy marine-grade bungee cord strung between them. And what this lets you do is take a special board and put it underneath these, just like you'd be doing if you were doing a paddle float rescue. And this could let you catamaran two kayaks side by side the same way that I do with my skin-on-frame canoes. Now, keep in mind, this is not necessarily the finished version of this system that you're looking at right now, so please do not try to duplicate the kayak catamaran based on this particular video. I just kind of wanted to show you how this looks. So if you think you might want this functionality for your kayak, Or if you just think that you prefer this style of rigging to straps and toggles, you can select this option when you're buying one of our kayak building kits. Now, in addition to just giving us catamaran ability, something else that's nice about having these pad eyes in these locations is they can do dual duty as routing points for the perimeter lines. So I've split the perimeter line. This one is going forward and this one is going to the back of the boat. And having these come across in this area is fantastic because it gives me two really good grab points that replaces the leather deck lines that were here previously, and that's really important for me, especially if I'm doing a cowboy style self-rescue. And then coming a little bit further along the back deck, you can see the stern end of this perimeter line here. This is coming through a couple pad eyes screwed down just like everywhere else. And then right here, we've got this weird little ball screwed onto the top of the gunnel. And what this is a size B ram mount ball that I pair with my action camera so I can get really nice shots from the back deck. And this is something that I've been working on really hard this year because up until now, I was always just screwing this down wherever I could make it work. And that doesn't give you the best operability of the camera, and it also doesn't give you very good shots. So I finally figured exactly where I want this to be and how I want to reinforce the kayak for it. And typically what I'm doing these days is I'm taking this long arm ram mount and then mounting it just like this on top of the ball. And then up here, you can see I've got my GoPro action camera, although this is compatible with a lot of different cameras. I often put my iPhone back here. And this just gives me a huge range of filming possibilities. I can come all the way back for a little bit wider shot. I can come all the way forward for a little bit more intimate shot. I can get a center line shot over here, or I can come all the way out here and get kind of an oblique shot. And on all of those options, I can still reach the camera from the cockpit so I don't burn through all my battery or all my memory cards. So pretty stoked about this setup. I've got instructions for this just standard in my kayak building course, and I'm probably gonna make a separate video about using this just to really get into the details of how this works. And then coming all the way to the back of the kayak, you can see that I've got this leather grab loop. Just like the lines everywhere else, this is tied to the inside of the frame, so you can tow, rescue, or carry this even if your boat is loaded with gear. And then right behind that, you can see I've got this little drain plug installed here. And this is an optional feature. To be quite honest, I didn't put a drain plug in any boat for the first 15 years that I owned a skin boat, and I didn't feel like it was a huge imposition. But now that I'm doing this more often, it is kind of nice sometimes to be able to open this up and drain water out the back. So totally up to you to decide if the extra work and complexity is worth this little feature back here. So last thing I want to mention about this kayak before we move on to the next one is that this boat is covered with a 12-ounce nylon cloth, which is about 25% heavier than the normal nylon that I use, but it ends up being about 30 to 40% more durable because of the extra coating that it absorbs. Now, unfortunately, that extra durability comes at the cost of about $50 worth of extra coating and 4 pounds of extra weight in the finished kayak. So for me personally, those trade-offs aren't worth it. Even as a coastal paddler, I find that the normal weight skin is plenty strong enough for me. But if you're someone who's going to be out there treating your kayak like it's a plastic kayak, or maybe you don't want to reskin as often, or maybe you're paddling in extremely remote areas, I could see an argument for going with a 12-ounce skin. And if you want to learn a little bit more about the trade-offs of different ways you can cover a skin boat, make sure that you check out the separate video that I made called Skin on Frame Durability. All right, so moving on to this LPB here, I think I want to start by just flipping this upside down, because what I want to show you here is a couple new options for protecting the keel. Now, the reason that keel protection is important is because as soon as the skin wears through in any single spot, you end up having to reskin the entire kayak. And it just makes sense to reinforce the areas that get the most wear as opposed to putting an extra heavy skin and paying an extra weight penalty. Now, the solution that you choose for this really depends on how you're going to use the boat. If you're someone who doesn't mind water launching and water landing most of the time, and you're just occasionally hitting obstacles and occasionally running up on beaches, you don't actually need very much protection on the bottom at all, and the normal skin coating system is going to be just fine for you. But if you're someone who's going to be running your boat up onto the beach every single time you land, or you're someone that's going to be crashing over underwater rocks, now we want to start thinking about beefing this area up. So what we're looking at right here is a brass strip that comes all the way around the bow, and this does add significant extra weight. This adds 5 ounces to the boat, but this pretty much makes your bow impervious to crashing into things. You can crash into sharp rocks, barnacles, coral reefs, whatever, and this brass is going to take that impact and not wear through this area prematurely right here. But this is probably an overkill solution for what most people need to do with their boats. So a better solution is something I just recently came up with, which was a way to add extra thick coating along the keel only here. Now, it took me quite a while to figure out how to do this because we're actually going outside the manufacturer's instructions and letting this coating partially cure before we paint it on the boat to get an extra thick layer. And so this is now also a standard part of my kayak building course, and this is going to add significant extra life to your keel, which is going to add significant extra life to the entire skin. Now, coming all the way to the back of the boat, you can see I've mounted this Delrin rub strip, which is just protecting this back corner here, which would otherwise wear through pretty quickly. Now, this is not a new feature on the boat. The only thing that's different is that I'm currently experimenting with the Delrin because it's a harder plastic than the high-density polyethylene. But on the other hand, it's also much less UV resistant and much more brittle. So I'm not shipping out Delrin currently. I'm still sending out HDPE, but I'm going to be doing this experiment on my own boat over the next couple years so I can get a side-by-side comparison between the ultimate lifespan of those two materials. All right, so turning this boat right side up, I'm just going to cover anything that is different than the boat that we just talked about. So coming all the way to the front here, on the last boat we had a little pulley hooked onto this for the sailing system, but if you've got a central deck ridge like this, you can just screw a plastic pad eye down right here, and I find that this works just fine for a fair lead for the uphaul line without even attaching any kind of pulley. Now, coming back a little bit further, you can see one possible catamaran attachment point for the ridged deck version here. And this is going to be ahead of the sail location. I don't know if I'm going to end up using this location or the one further back on the deck. This is just an experiment right now. You can see I've got that same mast step that I showed you earlier, and I've got these 2 metal pad eyes that do dual duty as stay points and also routing points for the perimeter line. And then coming a little bit further along the deck, just ahead of the cockpit here, you can see I've got this other potential catamaran attachment point. And it's going to be a while before I decide exactly where I want these to be. But the advantage to this location is that you could potentially reach the catamaran board from the cockpit, which means that at least in theory, you might be able to assemble and break down the kayak catamaran on the water. Now, in addition to these being useful for catamaran boards, you could also, in certain circumstances, put paddles underneath these, or you could make custom platforms that would slide underneath these and could have some padding that would touch the skin, and that would be a great little place to mount a compass or any other potential accessory that you'd want to be able to take off later. So there's a lot of versatility to these attachments that doesn't necessarily relate to the catamaran. And then down here, I've got that same little sail tie down and bungee loop that you saw in the last boat. This one's just in a slightly different position because of how the kayak is framed. Now, coming into the cockpit area here, all the outfitting is basically the same as the kayak that I just showed you, but a new option for the peaked deck version of my modern kayaks is these really cool little folding bilge pump clips that mount to the underside of the deck ridge. And these are awesome because they fold down so they don't get broken when you're moving your gear bags or your float bags in and out, but then they fold back out, and it just gives you a super convenient place to mount your bilge pump. Now, very last thing I want to show you on this LPB is this flat spot that I left at the stern that's reinforced a little bit underneath the skin. And what this is for a rudder bracket that allows you to mount a rudder, which is really helpful if you're installing a sailing system. Now, other than sailing, I almost never put a rudder on any of my skin boats because it adds 5 pounds, 6 hours, and $300 to the cost of your build. So for me personally, this is strictly a sailing accessory, but it is an option for a skin-on-frame boat. There's a couple different ways you can set this up. You can go with a flat spot like this, which kind of ruins the aesthetic of the back here, or you can keep the normal shaped stern and you can go with this style of bracket here, which isn't quite as positive but still works just fine. And then as far as different rudder choices, I like the Smart Track system for some reasons, and I like the Select system for other reasons. And I really can't go into it in much more detail than that right now. I will have a separate mini course on my website pretty soon showing how to install rudders and drop skegs in skin-on-frame boats. So I just wanted to make you aware that that is an option if you really need it for some reason. All right, I know that was a lot of information. Thanks for sticking with me on this longer video. Hopefully this gave you a good sense of the level of obsessiveness and detail that goes into every aspect of our skin-on-frame boats, and also a bunch of different options for personalizing your kayak for your individual needs. Now, like I said in the beginning, if you're already taking my boat building class and you're planning your build, this is a great refresher for all of the different outfitting options. And if you're already purchasing a kit from me, we can throw this stuff in the box. Usually it doesn't even increase the shipping rate. And that way, when you get to the end of your build and you're excited to get on the water, you're gonna have all of these outfitting materials, so you don't have to stop, do some shopping, and wait a couple weeks for all this stuff to arrive. So anyways, thanks for watching. If you liked this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. You can also find us on our website, capefalconkayaks.com, where I've got a bunch more skin-on-frame building video courses, plan sets, and various free skin-on-frame resources. You can also find us on Instagram at Cape Falcon Builds, where we post a daily build blog of everything we're working on here in the shop. And like I say every time, even if you're not normally a social media person, I would really encourage you to check out the Instagram, because you're gonna find so much really cool content there that never makes it onto the YouTube channel, and sometimes not even into my building courses. So that's it for now. Take care, be safe on the water, have fun building your skin boat.